scent of potpourri, the films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get instant access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. This week on the Patreon, I'm continuing my Flanagan Fridays series, with the first episode this week coming out with the next episode this week coming out with the first episode of my Haunting of Hill House review series, going episode by episode through The Haunting of Hill House. That hits on Friday, and then on Saturday I'm going to have the next edition of my Sci-Fi Saturdays installment, which is my review of Foundation Season 2, Episode 2 is going to be coming out this Saturday. And then previous to that, if you're listening to this day of release, yesterday on the Patreon, I released my next installment of my Patreon Potpourri episode series, where I'm going through a bunch of stuff that I'm watching on Criterion Channel. That went up on Wednesday. It's a full-length episode, about an hour long, where I'm talking about 4 different movies I watched on Criterion Channel recently. This installment covers my thoughts on the Richard Linklater movie Slacker, Police Story and Police Story 2, and Design for Living. So that is up on Patreon for the $5 and $10 tiers. That is what's going on Patreon this week. Once again, you can sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for all that and a whole bunch more content. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, which includes Letterboxd at Obsessive Viewer. And in our featured review this week, I'll be reviewing Michael Mann's latest film, Ferrari, which opened in theaters on Christmas Day and is rumored to be coming to VOD later this month, after what I have seen is apparently a disastrous box office return for the movie. And for this week's secondary review, later in the episode, I'm going to be joined by Mike to cover Dan Levy's directorial debut, Good Grief, which is currently streaming on Netflix. So that is what I've got going on this week on The Obsessive Viewer. I don't have a lot of news to cover in terms of industry news or anything, especially since I'm meeting with Mike here in half an hour. So I have a little bit of a tighter time frame for recording. But the one piece of news I wanted to bring up was that Judd Apatow has apparently spoken out against the decision for Barbie to be put into the Oscar race for adapted screenplay. He said that it's insulting to writers because there's no existing material from which to adapt it, that it was adapted. And to that, I saw like a tweet from Drew McWeeny that I'll put links to all this in the show notes. I don't have it right in front of me, but where he basically talked about how, no, Judd Apatow's probably wrong in that respect, because so much of Barbie, the movie, is predicated on our cultural understanding of what Barbie is in our culture. And that's why it is building off of what is conventional wisdom of the relationship between Barbie and Ken. And why Alan was funny is because of his role in the culture as a Barbie accessory, essentially. So it was really interesting. I'll put a link in the show notes. I don't really have like a dog in that race or anything because I don't care about the Oscars. I don't care about awards season or anything, which is funny because right now the Golden Globes are happening and I'm not really watching. I'm not watching it at all. I don't know anything going on. But anyway, that was just one little piece of news that Judd Apatow kind of came out in staunch opposition to the idea of Barbie being going for the adapted screenplay Oscar. I don't know what that does for original screenplay in terms of Oscar, thinking, but yeah, I don't know. There are people that are more interested in that cover that stuff. So I don't really have an opinion on that one way or the other. That's all the news that I really have this week. Yeah, I don't really have anything else, so I guess I can kind of just dive into the featured review. This week on the show, I am going to be doing a solo review of Ferrari, which came out on Christmas Day last year and is currently running in theaters. I watched it on a screener. Here's the thing, and this is going to kind of spoil a little bit of my review, not the movie itself, but I have a screener of this movie. And it's still playing in theaters. It's no longer playing in the theater that's right next to where I live, but it is playing at one that's kind of a little ways away. That because of that, I was like, I'm just gonna watch it at home. So last night I put it in and I was watching it and I got about 15 minutes in and I was just like, I'm too tired, and this is a 2 hour and 10 minute movie. I can already tell that it's not gripping me, and I don't want to turn it into a 4 hour and 10 minute movie by being distracted. So my plan was I'm going to go to the movie theater tomorrow. That way I have to watch it distraction free. And maybe I'll enjoy it more. Spoiler alert, I didn't end up going to the theater, oddly enough, because the theater was kind of packed when I looked at the seats and everything. Like, there was not a lot of vacant seats in that showing that I was going to go to, the only showing I had time to go to today. And that's weird because, the movie didn't perform well at the box office or anything. Then again, it was a smaller theater, smaller auditorium that it was in, so that can account for that. But I ended up watching the screener at home, and I wasn't distracted by it. I stopped to get a drink, but I paused it and came back to it. So I ended up finishing it before I actually would have finished it in the theater had I gone to that showing. So that's a little behind the scenes. Let me go into my featured review of the evening. Let's talk about Ferrari. Again, it's in theaters. I saw a rumor that it's going to be on VOD later this month. I couldn't really corroborate that, so that could be true or false. I'm not sure. I don't know when the expected announcement for that will be. But basically, I will do a non-spoiler review and then go into a spoiler review. When I do the spoiler review, I'll play a clip from the trailer and then go into spoilers. The premise is set in the summer of 1957 with Enzo Ferrari's auto empire in crisis. The ex-racer turned entrepreneur pushes himself and his drivers to the edge as they launch into the Miglia. I already forgot how to pronounce that, and I was so proud of myself because I could pronounce it when I was watching at home. Anyway, a treacherous 1,000-mile race across Italy. Director for this movie was Michael Mann, making his featured directorial return after 2015's Black Hat that I didn't see but was widely panned. That I know a lot of people did not like that movie. So that's interesting. But the writers writer for the movie was Troy Kennedy Martin, based on the book by Brock Yates. Cast includes Adam Driver, Shailene Woodley, Giuseppe Festini's, and Penelope Cruz. So in non-spoilers, here are my non-spoiler thoughts on Ferrari. I didn't like it. I ended up rating it 2 stars. It's a shame because I know that Michael Mann has been trying to make this movie for 30 years from what I could see online. He's been trying to make it for 30 years. Originally in the 90s, I think it was going to star Robert De Niro. Throughout the process, I think Christian Bale was going to be Ferrari at one point, but it ended up being Adam Driver, which I will say up top, I feel like there are people who do not care for Adam Driver's performance in this, or at least the Italian accent. I would say that his Italian accent is probably a bright spot of the movie for me. I didn't have a problem with it at all. In fact, there were other actors in this movie whose accents were just horrible. But I thought Adam Driver did a really good job in terms of his performance in this movie, even though the material wasn't there for him. And that's what I'm going to kind of get into with this review, is that as a figure, Enzo Ferrari in this movie, he is kind of split into a couple of different fronts, basically. It's kind of positioning him as having this double life. It introduces right off the bat that he has this double life where he has like kind of a secret family. He's been having an affair with a woman played by Shailene Woodley. And then they have a kid as well. And the kind of a big dramatic part of the movie is that the kid is a secret, and no one really knows about this kid that he has, this illegitimate child that he has, although he and his wife are kind of in an open marriage, and it's kind of messy in that regard as well. But the movie doesn't really do much with that, or it does focus on that pretty severely throughout the movie, but the problem is that it's contending with so many other things going on that it doesn't really have a cohesive feel to it, and that's where it kind of dragged for me. Because we get the introduction of Enzo and Laura, his wife, played by Penelope Cruz. They are partners in the auto company that they run, that they've run for like 11 years, 10 or 11 years, and this is like they're the figureheads of that. The movie begins with them dealing with, like, I think a Maserati driver coming into town to basically break some kind of record that Enzo had or Ferrari had on a track. So that's kind of the launching off point of the movie, and the all of the racing mechanics and racing milestones throughout the movie aren't that like necessarily that prevalent in the movie, and it's because we're also dealing with this familial dispute, this issue that comes up with like Laura finding out about the secret family and them kind of dealing with the personal drama that entails. Which that combined with the racing aspect of the movie and the whole Ferrari enterprise being in very, very, very dire straits monetarily speaking, those individually are interesting concepts, but when you mash them all together and it kind of mash them all together in a way that makes it so that nothing really comes through to the forefront, that makes the movie feel very, very slow paced, very dull, and very much unfocused. That's kind of my main issue with the movie overall, is that it really, really feels unfocused. And it feels like by the end of the movie, we're supposed to have like a pretty clear picture of who Enzo Ferrari was, who he is as a subject in this world, in this movie. And the movie tries to paint that picture by having him be a kind of grueling authoritarian figure within like his empire, who has his back against the wall and is forcing his drivers and forcing his company to do the very, very dangerous thing of doing this 1,000-mile race across Italy, specifically so the company can manufacture and sell 400 sports cars and stay afloat. Like, that's compelling story and that's compelling drama. But then you also have like Shailene Woodley's character, who's the character's name I have forgotten, and I feel terrible about that. But she is gearing up for their son's confirmation, and because of that, her name is Lena. Because of that, she is kind of putting pressure on Enzo to like figure out like, okay, is his name going to be is our son's name going to be Piero Lardi or Piero Lardi Ferrari? And that, like, I really wish that there was more to to that identity crisis that Enzo has with his other family and the way that weighs on him. Because there are moments like anytime the child Piero is on screen, it is very clear, like he is invested in the Ferrari brand. He's invested in racing. He's a little kid, but he tells Enzo, like, I want to be a race car driver when I grow up. And like, there are elements of that are great in terms of fostering this crisis of personal turmoil, that Enzo is experiencing with his professional life and his private life. The way that those kind of eat at him are pretty interesting, but it's very, very undercooked because it's in contention with so many different things. But that is really interesting, and I wish that it would have been harped on a little bit more, because the downside is that because there are so many different things going on in the movie, because of that, we have this vacuum of detail, or this not vacuum, but this very short span of time that is supposed to be about, to cover like the identity crisis of Piero and who he is as a Ferrari or as a Lardy, basically, Shailene Woodley's character's last name. And so because of that, because that's so confined, there's a scene that feels just so heavy-handed and like such a narrative shortcut, where Ferrari is leaving the house where Lena and Piero live, and Piero is in the window, and he's just like he's like pounding his fists on the pane, saying Ferrari, 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 and it's like that. It just comes across as so. Like it just comes across as just a quick shortcut to communicate to us that, like, oh yeah, Enzo has to make a choice and he needs to figure out if he's going to claim this child as his own and make him his heir, basically. And it's such a cheap tactic in terms of the story or in the screenplay, and it didn't play well for me. Other parts in this movie, again, the urgency, the sense of urgency and importance that is placed on the different drivers and the race itself of the 1,000-mile race across Italy, the Miglia. That whole aspect is so undercooked, and it just doesn't feel like it should have, like, it doesn't feel like it has the importance that it should have. And by the end of it, you realize it really should have had a lot of importance. It comes very late in the movie. With about 40 minutes left, we get like the actual race. And in terms of filming it, it looks good. It looks interesting, especially with the backdrop of like Italian countryside and just this beautiful like landscape and everything. That's great. Like, it looks great, but it's just kind of a very kind of too little too late, because we don't really get at least I didn't really get the sense of urgency with it. And that's kind of a problem with the entire movie, is, again, it just kind of plays up these too many different things about Ferrari's life. And the result is that these elements of his life don't really compute or don't really coalesce into a satisfactory all-encompassing picture of Enzo Ferrari as a subject. So I rated it 2 stars. I didn't like the movie, and I'm going to go into a brief spoiler discussion or spoiler review here in a second, because there are a couple of sticking points in the film that I wanted to kind of talk out here. So I'm going to go into spoilers for Ferrari. Once again, it is currently in theaters, finishing out its theatrical run, and it should be on VOD soon. But I honestly can't really recommend it. It's not really that good. You might enjoy it, but it just felt very, very undercooked for me. So, so having said that, I'm going to go into spoilers for Ferrari. I'm going to play a clip from the trailer. If you want to sidestep the spoilers, check the show notes for timestamps. Those show notes are going to be at obsessiveviewer.com/OV410. So check that out if you want to navigate the timestamps. But if not, check out this clip from the trailer for Ferrari. And when I come back, I'm going to spoil the movie.
Two objects cannot occupy the same point in space at the same moment in time. The corner races at you. You have perhaps a crisis of identity. Am I a sportsman? Or a competitor? If you get into one of my cars, you get in the win.
All right, so spoilers on for Ferrari. A few things here because I don't have quite as much time here as I would like, but yeah, the movie didn't really work for me for a multitude of reasons, but one main one is that it introduces one of the first scenes of the movie is Enzo visiting his son's grave, and we see on the epitaph, I think, we see that he died a year before the movie's set. So he was, I think he was like 23 or maybe 13. I don't know. But he died a year prior to when this movie takes place. And we see this moment of vulnerability where Enzo is talking to his son's grave, and he's talking about how he's haunted by ghosts, that of his brother, his father, and then he references two friends who died while racing. And then he says that he has dreams of them and he sees them and it's haunting him. But then he says that he sees his son too. And he tells his son's grave that his face is one that he wants to see. And this is like the most vulnerable we ever see Enzo in the movie. And it's beautiful. It's a hauntingly beautiful scene, a beautiful sentiment, but it kind of doesn't really track or doesn't really come into play much in the movie. Like it kind of feels like it's not that connected to his story or the story that we're being told of Enzo Ferrari. It doesn't really help that. And then at the end of the movie, we get this big blow up scene between him and Laura, where she blames him for their son's death. And that, I think, could have been a beautiful scene. That could have been a very affecting scene, but because we don't have really any context for their son's death, aside from them being kind of apart in an open marriage and seeing them at the grave at separate times, that scene is kind of built around having a little bit too much of exposition to catch us up. So like as Penelope Cruz is giving this big performance, this big emotional performance, she's also saddled with having to tell the audience, like, yeah, our son was sick and you tried to, you couldn't save our son and you're the reason he's dead. And then we have Adam Driver giving his side of the performance, being like having to literally tell the audience that, like, I thought that I could save him. Like I should have been able to save him. I know everything about cars and I learned everything about medicine so that I could save him and I failed, or something like that. And like, it just felt so, again, like a shortcut. It felt like they didn't want to build up the emotional impact of a child's death, and instead they seeded it early and then brought us up to speed as we're having the emotional climax of that story, of that part of the story, play out in front of us. And it just didn't really work for me. It really, really didn't work for me. A couple other things that I was not too keen on in the movie was mainly the race at the end. The big finish in terms of the horrific crash that happens that kills, I think, is it Alfonso de Portago? One of the drivers. Again, there are moments that are seeded so heavy-handedly that it just feels like, it feels very just lazy in terms of the story. So the first instance of that is the beginning of the movie when the Maserati team, I think, is trying to to break Enzo's record on the track. And they're monitoring it while they're in church. I thought that was really clever and interesting because they all had the stopwatches as the firing pistol was going off so that they could clock it. But immediately after that, Enzo's like, okay, we're going to try to break the record again right now. And they get the driver. And then here's the thing, that scene where the driver is going across the track, it is so kind of heavy-handed that it's going to end in tragedy, that it's going to end in the driver's death, because he shows up, he has his fiance there, and then as he's driving the track, we get the new driver come up, I think it's De Portaggio, come up, and he's like, hey, yeah, I saw you on the street, and I wanted to introduce myself. And then Enzo's like, oh, I don't need a new driver. And then moments later, the driver that he has is dead. And like, it just feels very, very just lazy in terms of the story and trying to just bring us into the next stage of the story. And that similarly happens at the end of the movie with, I think it's De Portaggio's death, where he is like, they're at various stages of the race, and he stops and like he tells like the I think the actress girlfriend of his, he's like, yeah, meet me here, I'm gonna win the race, and you know, meet me there. And then it's like, yeah, well, he's not gonna win the race, something horrible is gonna happen, because they're very much basically I don't know, it's very heavy-handed. It's not well concealed at all. And I can understand the symmetry of it, I guess, like the calling back to it, but to the beginning, but it just felt very, very undercooked and lazy. So that didn't work for me. The actual visualization of the crash is horrifying, is absolutely horrifying. There's a thing where online, there was a clip of someone asking Adam Driver what he thought of how fake or how goofy the crashes looked in the movie. It said an audience member at a film festival screening in Poland asked Adam Driver what he thought of the crash scenes. The audience member said they looked pretty harsh, drastic, and I must say cheesy for me, which in my opinion, I think that's an incredibly rude thing to say. Like, if that's your opinion, that's your opinion, but it's also at a film festival where they're celebrating the movie. It's a whole thing. But anyway, Adam Driver replied and said, fuck you, I don't know, next question. I was like, yeah, that's really good. But in terms of the visualization of the crashes, like, I mean, there's like 2 crashes in the movie. The big one is a little bit clunky and awkward, but it didn't really drive me away from the movie, because I already wasn't that invested in it or anything. So that was a little bit of that I didn't really care at that point. What I wasn't anticipating was that we would see it just clear out that crowd. It was very, very unexpected to actually see the car just like knock down the people in the crowd. I thought that was just kind of devastating and horrifying. And it's a shame, because the movie didn't really build up to that moment for me in a way that would have made that more dramatic, or would have made it land more with me, because throughout the movie up until that point, we've been dealing with so many different facets of Enzo's character, that the entire, like, the race itself and the implications of what it means for who Enzo is in terms of like his drive to be on top and to win and to be successful and everything. Because of all that, like, it didn't really resonate with me as a defining moment of the movie. And that's a shame, because it really happened. So I don't know. But anyway, that's a kind of brief featured review, but I don't really think I have much else to say about Ferrari. I wasn't really that big a fan of it. I didn't like it. I rated it 2 stars. Yeah, it didn't work for me all that well. So, let me know what you thought. Let me know what you thought of Ferrari. It's a brief review, and I'm sorry for that, but I don't really have much else to say about it. By the end of the movie, when we see the like title card it's after, Penelope Cruz, Laura, before, like, after she said, like, you never give your son your name until I'm dead or whatever. And then the title card at the end is just like, she died in 1970 something. And then Piero Ferrari is now the, like, executive or whatever in charge of Ferrari. everything. And I'm like, okay, that seems weird. I don't know. It didn't really, maybe it's a biopic problem because I don't really like biopics in general. But it just feels like the movie was grasping at straws for what they could do in terms of telling the story of Enzo Ferrari the way that like Michael Mann wanted to tell it. And it didn't really feel like a cohesive story at the end of the day. So that's a bit of a shame. But maybe whatever he does next, Michael Mann, whatever he does next, which I think is actually Heat 2, hopefully it's good. So I don't know, but I didn't really like this one. That's my review of Ferrari. Let me know what you thought. Again, you can find me on social media at Obsessive Viewer, and also email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. That is our featured review for a week. Coming up, you will hear me review Good Grief with Mike. So stay tuned for that in just a moment.
They tell me I view obsessively.
Okay, and joining me for our secondary review of the week here on the Obsessive Viewer podcast, it is Mike White, who can be found, of course, on the internets, on Twitter and all that at I Am Mike White, and his band, As Good As It Gets, provides the theme song for this podcast. Mike, welcome back to the show in an
Thanks, man.
Yeah, an unprecedented era for the podcast where we are recording a New Year episode before the Year in Review episode. So
yeah, that's true. I also feel like this is my first not that they're not all special, but like this is my first non pillar episode of the podcast in a long time.
It is.
It's kind of fun to do just a movie of the week with
Absolutely.
You. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been such a long time because last year you were on the Year in Review episode, and then couldn't get you on.
6?
No, you weren't on for Scream 6. No,
oh my
I did
gosh.
that with my
we'll
friend
have to
Sam.
Do commentary for that soon.
We do. We still owe Patreon commentaries for Scream 5 and Scream 6.
Oh, we owe 5.
We do.
Still.
We do.
Oh,
yep.
we gotta do 5.
We gotta.
Okay.
We gotta. We'll
Awesome.
figure it out. But yeah, and then Scream 6, and then obviously there's never going to be a Scream 7. So, yeah.
No, at this point there better not be.
I know. I've talked to death about it. I've talked it to death on the podcast, but man, it's been a whole thing. Yeah.
And listeners who are curious, whatever Matt has told you about Scream 7, pretty much I agree with. We've had these conversations on the side. Mm-hmm. We both kind of agree.
Yeah.
What we want, the only thing that would be salvageable is just not going to happen. So at this point, give it a couple years and reboot it.
Yep.
It's over.
Yep. The only way I can see being excited about Scream 7 is if it's a few years down the road from now and someone else is making it, some other studio, because I think that they have just burned it. Like as an aside, I will say this: this would be a fun time for Shout Factory, Scream Factory to put together a big box set of the 6 Scream movies.
Oh, absolutely!
Yeah. If they could do it. But yeah, anyway, Mike, for our secondary review, we're going to be talking about Good Grief, which is currently on Netflix. But before we do that, can you tell people where they can find you online, and what you have had going on with As Good As It Gets, and any furry companions? Which we can go more in depth about that next week on the Year in Review episode.
Yeah, welcome to the Cat Podcast. We have cats. We adopted 2 kittens, Zelda and Violet, and we're very happy about them, and they're adorable, and I love them. And I never thought that I would like cats, but I do. You can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at I Am Mike White. I'm not really on there all that often. I mean, I get on there to glance, but I'm not super active. And on Instagram, I am as.good.as.it.gets. Anyway, that's my band, As Good As It Gets, and we did the theme song for this. And we put out some music last year, at the end of last year in October, and we're kind of sitting on that, kind of kind of just taking a little break from music. Not anything serious, not anything long term, but we're kind of taking a break from being present, being on the internet for a little while. We're talking all the time, working on songs. We'll definitely have some stuff out, but just, feeling at the end of the year a little burnt out on the internet and just trying to take some time. So here I am talking to you on the internet. But, funny enough, I'm actually really excited about this.
Me too.
Me being on here was actually my idea.
Yes.
Just wanted to get on and chat a while. Hopefully, I don't want to say anything officially, but hopefully more semi-regularly than I have been.
Absolutely. And that is something that it was kind of a serendipitous moment because this is like, I don't want to get into specifics, but like I've been going weekly with the podcast and like you had mentioned like, yeah, we should do like, every other Sunday we should talk or however frequently. I don't want to broadcast how frequently. Sure. We can like talk and everything and maybe podcast something. And then I'm just like, oh, this could be very fortuitous. So this is the first of hopefully numerous times we'll be able to chat throughout the year. But I totally get your sentiment of getting away from the internet because being burnt out on it and everything. Just a really quick thing is that like at least we have this year is going to be a very quiet year on social media. 2024.
Yeah, nothing particular going on in November.
Nope.
Yeah, it would be such a chill year this year.
Yeah. Like I'm purposely making a choice at one of my New Year's resolutions is I'm not going to engage in any stuff like that this year.
Oh,
I can't.
Engage.
I can't. I know what
it's bad.
Yeah. It's just yeah. But what we can engage with is movies.
We can. In particular, we're talking about Dan Levy's directorial debut.
Yes. Good Grief, which hit Netflix on January 5th, so this past Friday. The premise, according to IMDb, is when his husband unexpectedly dies, Mark's world shatters, sending him and his two best friends on a soul-searching trip to Paris that reveals some hard truths they each needed to face. Written and directed by Dan Levy, it stars Dan Levy, Ruth Negga, Hamish Patel, and Luke Evans. Now, Mike, I think hopefully if we have time, we can do a non-spoiler and spoiler review if you're good with that.
Sure.
So we'll do a non-spoiler review, but first I wanted to get your thoughts on Dan Levy, because I feel like you are a Schitt's Creek fan. Is that correct?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
I have still not seen it.
Oh, that's wild. Okay. I didn't know that. It's funny that you say that because I was going to say before we even talk about the movie, I think you have to start with Dan Levy. It's interesting. We're kind of pronouncing his last name differently.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm probably saying it wrong.
I don't know that I'm saying it correctly either. Dan Levy, Eugene's child. I apologize to the Levy or Levy family. But,
I was more focused on making sure that I didn't mispronounce Ruth's last name. So
to begin, like I said, I do think this conversation begins with him, and I think he's a treasure. I love Dan Levy. I really did like Schitt's Creek quite a bit. My wife and I binge watched it. I guess back during quarantine, and we loved every minute of it. And he's really the standout in a pretty stacked cast. So I was intrigued to hear what he had to say in kind of a directorial debut. He also wrote the movie, produced the movie, so it's definitely his project. And maybe I should have studied a little more. I don't know exactly how it came to be, but it seems as if, the Schitt's Creek and Netflix relationship has been fortunate and financially beneficial for both parties, right? Yeah. So I imagine Netflix approached him, and it makes me wonder if this was a project like a passion project he always wanted to do, or this came from scratch or what. I'm not sure, but I knew one thing was for sure, that I would kind of follow him wherever he goes. He was in, what was the name of the movie? Happiest Season last year.
Yeah.
The Christmas movie that I thought was very good. But I love Dan Levy. His presence on screen. I love the way he carries himself. His performances are I almost said understated. He's understated in this movie, but he's not understated in Schitt's Creek. But
yeah, from all the clips I've seen of Schitt's Creek, he seems like he's kind of playing it big in Schitt's Creek.
He is playing it big, and the whole show is big. But he is often the straight man to his sister's like craziness and shenanigans.
Okay.
So he's great. And I also think he's pretty great in this. And I love him. I think I would kind of watch anything that he would do. So what about you, as someone who hasn't watched Schitt's Creek? What drew you to this? Was it Dan Levy? Was it the Netflix partnership? Was it the trailer? What do you think?
Full disclosure, it was the excitement that Netflix was releasing something new in January, and with me having this whole idea of doing weekly obsessive viewer podcasts where like the main review is going to be a theatrical movie and the secondary review is going to be usually a streaming one, I was like, yeah, okay, good grief, there we go. If it could be good, bad, whatever. And then I noticed like, oh, it's Dan Levy, and then I was like, Mike likes Schitt's Creek, and like the kind of it all kind of formed from there. But Schitt's Creek is a show that I need to watch because
you do.
Like correct me if I'm getting any of these wrong, but like Eugene Levy, Catherine O'Hara, Dan Levy, and Annie Murphy, all people who I have seen in things and loved them in things.
Yeah, and
like, I'm sure that there are other people in the show, but like, I feel like it would be a very good fit for me. But that's what attracted me to seeing this, and knowing it was going to be on Netflix. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So, one thing that really impressed me about Dan Levy, as an actor in this movie is, like you said, he isn't, I guess he is pretty understated, but it is very much in touch with that internalized grief that the character is experiencing. And this might be a completely superficial, completely dumb comparison, but like there was a moment like probably halfway through the movie where like, in terms of his overall style and like the costuming and like his wardrobe and like the winter thing, like he looks like damn good. Like he's like dressed very, very nicely. And like I put in my notes, there's something to his presence, the combination of the way he looks, like the sweater and everything, the facial hair, and the way that he is communicating his feelings and his grief, that I wrote, he's like the embodiment of what Ted Mosby from How I Met Your Mother saw himself as, but could never be.
That's so good. Oh my gosh, that's spot on.
I just had that feeling. I was like, yeah, okay, this is like Ted Mosby's like dream persona.
Gosh. I can't believe how spot on that is. That's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is something gravitational, I think, about Dan Levy and his gait, the way he carries himself. He his mannerisms with his hands and his voice are very elegant and soft and understated, but he's also like over 6 feet tall. So he's a large person with a presence who is unbelievably stylish. I feel the same thing that you feel. So if we start reviewing the movie, I'll just say he's the best part of the movie.
Oh, hands down. Yeah. And
that's a good thing for him. I do think we'll have some critiques about everybody else. But he does, he has a gravity, and he was that way in Schitt's Creek. He was the funniest. And then when some of his storylines in Schitt's Creek became a little more dramatic, those were also I keep saying gravitational. I don't know. It was just magnetic, the best part. Yeah. Magnetic, yeah. And that translated into in a feature film version of the Dan Levy experience as well. He's so interesting to watch.
Yeah, and there is also like, for the faults of the movie that we'll get into in terms of the supporting characters, I would say, for the issues that arise from that, the script, as it deals with Mark as a character and his grief, is very smartly written. The way that it doesn't center the emotional like outbursts or anything that he could have. It doesn't center it around like a dramatic moment. So like the scene in the shop where he is trying to exchange something, he has like an emotional, like not breakdown, but he has an emotional moment where he like lays it all out and he's like, this is why I'm doing this. This is what's happened. But like, that's not like a big, that's not a big centerpiece emotional moment because it's living in that grief. And there are scenes where he's just expounding on like what he's feeling in terms of his grief for his husband that I'm just like, that is just such a beautiful and haunting like expression of what it is to lose someone. And I just thought that was very, very strong writing and performing from Dan Levy.
The performing, certainly. The writing, anytime Mark, Dan Levy's character, speaks, is also very well done. And I also get the sense from the movie, it's very monologue-y. And it's almost, it's like a sequence of monologues. And again, I wonder, first feature film, how much of this did he have in a notebook somewhere where he's like, when I make a movie, I'm going to write this monologue? Because anytime Mark, Dan Levy's character, is speaking and giving a monologue, it's pitch perfect and evocative and powerful and well done. Again, I think we're hinting, and I think you agree with me, how we feel about the other characters. I don't know that fully translates through the rest of the movie, but I will give you that if the center of the movie is Mark and his grief, it's excellent. Unfortunately, half of the movie is the friends' characters. Yeah,
and they just kind of really just fall by the wayside at a certain point. And I really, and we'll talk about this in spoilers, but like there's a level where there's a point in the movie where it tries to tie it all together. Like the plot summary says, it's like they reveal some hard truths that they need to face. Those kind of come up out of, not necessarily out of nowhere, but it just feels like it's trying to wrap something up in a bow that isn't properly packaged to begin with. It feels very, very tenuous in terms of trying to wrap things up, but we can talk more about that.
Well, yeah, we'll save that for the spoiler section. But if we're talking about, are we talking about kind of the one, it's the climax of the movie, essentially, on a particular set piece, and they all kind of take turns having a conversation. Yeah, that felt very monologue-y. And I mean that in kind of a negative way, where like each character had a monologue assigned to them, and it's not even so much that they were reacting or having a conversation with each other. They just kind of all said things at each other. Yes,
that is exactly how it felt. And the way that, I mean, obviously the movie is positioned specifically on Mark as a character. And like, it feels like those monologues were built around the idea that these other two characters would have like as strong of a character arc as Mark does, but they don't. Like the resolution of the two characters, they're different things. It feels like they're plucked out of a completely different movie at some point. And that was I
don't think the movie would be any less convincing. I don't think Mark's story would be any less essential if the friends' characters had less to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It just felt a little bit, not necessarily overstuffed, but it just felt like it just felt like they needed something to not compete with, but to complement the grief stuff. And it felt like it kind of didn't necessarily come out of nowhere, but wasn't seated properly.
Yeah, I think that comes from, or the rub that we're feeling comes from, they're all characters in their late 30s, right? I think Mark specifically mentions being 35.
I think he said 38.
Did you say 38? Okay.
Yeah.
So they're in their late 30s, almost 40, and Mark's story is a story of grief over a relationship that an adult would have in their 30s, right?
Yeah.
His husband of presumably some years dies at the beginning of the movie, and he's going through grief. The other two characters are in a coming of age movie.
Yeah.
That's odd to me.
Yeah, and with in terms of like Sophie's character arc, she is kind of at an opposite end of Mark in terms of like her relationship in the movie, in that it's not necessarily a state of arrested development, but it's like a thing where she can't get to the next level with the guy she's with, which is like you said, it's a good coming of age arc and everything, but it just doesn't really it doesn't really mix well with the grief stuff. And I think that, like I said before, it just kind of feels like her and the other character, Thomas, like they kind of fall by the wayside. Yeah. I think they kind of fall by the wayside.
So Sophie, Ruth Nega's character, this was in my notes. I just don't like hot mess characters. I don't know if that's a taste thing or we're supposed to kind of dislike hot mess characters. I wonder if there are people who, I don't know, see a bit of themselves in hot mess characters. Like, oh honey, I feel you because I'm a hot mess too. But I've never any hot mess character in a movie takes me out of it a little bit. I've always had trouble connecting with hot mess characters, and I know I keep saying hot mess over and over again, and that's a trope, and it's a bit of a cliche. And then later on in the movie, she calls herself a hot mess. And it was almost the moment where, like when a movie confirms the thing you're being critical about. You know what I mean? Do you ever watch a movie and you're like, oh, the movie's kind of doing this, and then it like says that thing out loud?
Oh yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, I just don't like that.
Oh yeah, I've seen a Zack Snyder movie.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's so interesting you say that. And I don't want this to detract from the review at all or anything, but like I just recently, within the last couple of days, saw for the first time Frances Ha. The Noah Baumbach movie, and like that's a hot mess character coming of age story, and like it's done so incredibly well because the character is so endearing and so interesting at that it's like seeing any other movie that has that archetype is going to be just downgraded for me because it exposes the archetype. It's kind of like the Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story effect on music biopics. Like I've seen the best in Frances Ha, and like seeing now Sophie in Good Grief, it's like, okay, we get it. Like do something a little bit more interesting. And like the resolution of her story is upbeat and uplifting and interesting, I guess. Sure. But it just, the road there isn't that well done. Same with Thomas's story as well. It just, they both feel secondary.
Himesh Patel, I'm not even quite sure what his story is. Is his entire arc that he's lamenting being second or third fiddle to everybody?
I guess. And we'll have to talk about that in spoilers, because there was a moment where like his monologue.
Yeah.
I thought
his was the one we're talking about.
Yeah.
At the end. Yeah.
It did not compute with me as in terms of being like the conclusion of the story that we had been seeing him go through in the movie.
Yeah. Notes on Luke Evans, Oliver, who plays Dan Levy's husband in the movie, who dies early on. That is not a spoiler. That is that's the plot.
Yep.
His performance, that character, what'd you think there?
He was okay. He was good. I liked that there was like one flashback, I think.
I was just going to talk about
early
this.
on. Yeah. And like, I was trying to I thought it was beautifully done. Like, I thought that in terms of like filmmaking, beautiful.
Me too. I thought, I was like, oh, we're in for we're in for a great one.
Yeah. But I couldn't really understand, and I'm a little bit foggy on it now, but like, was that a flashback to before, or was that him imagining what the next day would have been like if he hadn't died? Or was it...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
No,
because he's referencing...
that was that morning.
Okay.
I think it was that morning. Yeah.
Okay.
Or yesterday or whatever.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
But there's a really cool... the flashback is done where there's like transitions where he's looking at a certain area in the flashback to pick up something, and then in the modern time, the next day, actual time, he picks that thing up.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really cool transition. There were really couple interesting and worthwhile edits or camera angles. I thought it was interesting. Later on, there are two characters in a museum looking at were they Monet? Was it a Monet exhibit?
Sure. I think so.
And for a second, so they kiss, and then the camera goes behind them to show a wide shot, like they're perfectly centered, and then it goes behind but wider to see the whole painting. I don't know. I haven't really done the work on what that means, but I just thought that was a really cool... Strange to kind of flip the camera angle in the middle of a kiss, but I liked it. It was engaging.
Yeah, it was not boring at all. Like, it was there's some purpose behind it, but I couldn't detect it, but like it was a very good flourish to it. Yeah.
One small complaint, sorry,
Okay.
is this could have easily been a Christmas movie if you released it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So weird to put it out in January.
It is weird, and like, I don't like it's one of those murky ones where I think it technically had maybe a run in like very limited run in theaters at the end of 2023.
Oh, yeah.
I'm counting it as 2024. I don't care. Like, it's a 2024 movie. Yeah. But I don't know. Do you want to go into spoilers for Good Grief?
Spoil it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to play a clip from the trailer for Good Grief. If you want to avoid that, check the show notes for timestamps, all of that. When we come back, we're going to be spoiling Good Grief. So here is a clip from the trailer. Once again, it is streaming on Netflix.
I've been reading that the brain is like a muscle. That's why getting over a death is so hard. Because your brain has been trained to feel things for a person. When they go away, your head is still operating under the impression that it should feel those things for that person. Like muscle memory.
I think we'll hold off on the will for today.
Do I look older to you? I feel like I've aged a lot.
No.
Yes, your husband just died. You're allowed. My God.
So spoilers on for Good Grief. And Mike, one thing I wanted to kind of touch on real quick up top is that it's something we didn't talk about in non-spoilers, but there was such an interesting, like, I guess comedic beat, but kind of not even surreal, but the funeral scene, with the actress giving the eulogy.
Yeah.
I thought that was handled so well in terms of...
Me too.
It was hilarious. It was touching to see like Dan Levy, his reactions to it, just this numb grief, and her saying like, yeah, he influenced everyone's lives, especially mine. Like, yeah, I thought that was very, very good. But
anytime the death and Mark's grief is center stage, I thought it was great. I thought there were great moments. Really, the whole first half of the movie, the inciting incident, I thought Oliver's father's speech was amazing. I mean, I had lip quivers listening to that speech. I thought that was great. And the rest of the movie, really, when they go to Paris, I feel like it starts to unravel is maybe a bit harsh, but it loosens for me.
Yeah. Yes, it loosens. Like that. Like, it feels like everything pre the trip to Paris is this kind of incredible meditation on grief and like exploring. And then And then it just turns into not necessarily, it doesn't fully turn into something else, but it turns into something else. Like it feels like,
it turns into this like eat, pray, love, three friends, let's go find ourselves.
Yeah.
That I don't know. Part of me is all for letting a movie be what it is and letting the artist tell the story they want to tell. But the other part of me is like, I feel like I don't know that you should have skipped forward a year.
Right.
I think sitting in those first couple of months was the more interesting part of the movie.
Yeah. And even then, I feel like there was a weird misstep when we mark it at 6 months after the death, and like they're talking about like, oh, we're going to get you a dating profile like 6 months after his husband died. Like what? Like that kind of took me out of the movie for a moment, because I'm like, Dan, you could have written any number of time in this. Like, I don't know why. Like, that is so incongruous to like humanity, in my opinion. Like, I can't. Yeah, I don't know.
So the major spoil or twist, if it's a twist, I feel like calling it a twist is maybe a little unfair. But basically, Mark finds out that his husband was sleeping with somebody else and planning on leaving Mark that night, and left him a Christmas card and basically said, I found somebody else. And we meet that character. So part of the tension of the movie, or at least from the middle of the movie to the end, is how does Mark deal with that grief in Congress with the anger he feels toward him at the same time. And I think that that's interesting. I think that that's a great wrinkle. I think dealing with that is great. I also think keeping that a secret from his friends is interesting storytelling. But to kind of go back to how I feel like sitting in those first couple of months of grief would be better, that it reminded me of Alexander Payne's The Descendants.
Oh, I have not seen it.
Oh, no. Okay. Yep. Well, it does this sort of thing better, and the grief is confined to a short couple of weeks, or maybe a month or two, or something like that, and you really feel George Clooney dealing with that rather than this odd friendship coming of age trip to Paris. So let's talk about that Ferris wheel scene.
Yes. But real quick, just first off, the whole like infidelity thing. Like there's a moment where I think he references that they were in an open marriage, or that and like I thought that was interesting, but it was kind of just, it didn't really go anywhere, or wasn't really that prominent. But I thought that was interesting to introduce that and be like have this like this person that he has no knowledge who he is or anything being present, and like being someone that's, as he says in the movie, shares him with him. But it also felt like it was so underwritten as a mystery that it felt like it kind of felt like it was, if not intentionally, then just unintentionally, like leading toward like, oh, it's actually going to be like he has like a long lost nephew that he connected with or something, and then it's going to be all a big misunderstanding. But it wasn't, and I was fine with it. But anyway, the
underwritten is a good way to put it. Because I think the whole plot is underwritten. Yeah. Whereas the monologues, to varying degrees of success, are overwritten.
Yes. And like that. So let's go ahead and go to Thomas's monologue on the Ferris wheel.
For the climax of the movie, that was my least favorite scene.
Yeah.
I was really out on the movie by then.
In that scene, if I missed something, or if I'm misinterpreting it, let me know. But like, is there, like, it was him saying, like, was he confessing his love for Mark, or?
Yeah, that, I think.
Yeah, it felt.
You know what's funny? That's my read of it as well, but I so disliked that idea that I kind of like discounted it. Yeah. I was like, surely that's not what he's saying.
Yeah, and it felt so like out of nowhere, especially because they had mentioned earlier in the movie that like, yeah, they dated for a year 15 years ago and it didn't work. And it's like, yeah, so they're friends. Okay, cool. Like, that's fine. I don't know why we would need something like that when we also have this guy going through grief of his husband. Like, it's just so, it felt very unnecessary. It kind of felt like the movie was searching for an arc for Thomas and landed on that rather than, so I don't know. In terms of dialogue, it's great, but I think that I think there's some work to be done on his plotting and character stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like the words he was saying were impressive, but the choices were odd. I didn't quite understand. Yeah, and then Sophie has the whole thing where it just kind of turns out that she's like, oh yeah, I'm a lush, I'm an alcoholic, I'm gonna stop drinking, and then the denouement is like, oh yeah, I'm married to this guy again. Like we got back together and we're getting married, and it's like, okay, okay, that 5 minutes ago you're confessing that you what your main problem is and everything, and like it just felt very rushed. Like it's like showcase, like having this big moment reveal like what the issues are that they have and like how that affects their friendship, and then like instead of having that be earlier in the movie or what have you, we have that like at the climax of the movie, and then the resolution is them like now that they have expressed that or said that out loud, now we skip past where they work through it, and now they have worked through it, and it's like it didn't work for me. It does a lot of telling rather than showing at the end of the movie, and I think I'm left disappointed because it starts so well. Should we do you want to wrap it up and kind of give our
let's
final
start
thoughts?
wrapping it up. I ended up rating it 3 stars. Not gonna be this is a hacky joke, but it is my top movie of 2024 right now.
Me too. In the number 1 spot.
I think that it shows a lot of promise for Dan Levy as a filmmaker. And it doesn't nothing that I found to be negative about the movie is damning enough for me not to want to root for him as a filmmaker and watch more of his stuff if he does anything more.
Yeah, well said. I gave it actually an extra half star only because I love Dan Levy so much. I thought the premise was great, and there were moments that I thought were fantastic. I do think it's overwritten in terms of the dialogue. Now, in some cases, that's successful. I think everything with Mark is fantastic. But then I also think the friend characters are overwritten to a negative degree. That said, the plot is kind of underwhelming. There are characters I don't connect with, and ultimately I left kind of wanting more from Dan Levy, more from Mark as a character, but not really any more from the movie. Well said also. I'm glad that we kind of we're on the same page for this. For this. For sure.
So that's our review of Good Grief. Gonna kind of wind down. I'm gonna cut you loose, Mike, here in a moment after I give you a platform to do that. I'm gonna close out the episode on my own to do a potpourri section since I don't want to go over our allotted time. But before that, Mike, what other any parting thoughts for Good Grief? And if not, where can people find you online and everything?
Yeah, nothing more for Good Grief. Currently my movie of the year, and then in about 12 months, it'll be one of my most forgettable movies of the year. Unfortunately. Other than that, by the time we talk next, I don't think there will be any new news, any music or anything, but maybe in a couple months. Like I said, just kind of taking time off from being on social media and being present, but time on the Obsessive Viewer podcast. We will be coming back next weekend to record our end of the year episode. Obviously, the favorite episode of the year. Looking forward to that.
I'm so excited. It's the best. I'm so excited for it. And I'm excited to get to chat with you more throughout the year as well.
For sure.
Social media links, letterbox link. Where can people find you?
At I am Mike White, everywhere that matters. My band is called As Good As It Gets, and all of the band stuff is As Good As It Gets music. And if you want to help us out, listen to our Spotify. We appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mike. And yeah, stay tuned for a solo potpourri to wind down the episode. Until we talk next time, Mike, next week for the year in review episode. Thank you for your time tonight.
Yeah, man. No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Yep.
Glad to be here.
Okay. And thank you once again to Mike for joining me for that review of Good Grief. Now to wind down the episode, I'm going to do a brief potpourri segment where I'm going to talk about 3 movies that I watched recently on Criterion Channel. As I said before, I have been getting a lot of use out of my Criterion Channel subscription, and I was going to do a Patreon potpourri episode about the Infernal Affairs Trilogy, but I decided to do it for potpourri for this episode. It's kind of interesting because what I did was basically I have a private list on Letterboxd that has all of the like Criterion Channel stuff that I have on my list on Criterion Channel. And what I'm going to do, and I also have like a master like watch list and everything. Well, actually just my watch list on Letterboxd, but on weeks, since I'm still going to hopefully be going weekly on Obsessive Viewer, as I've been saying, basically what I'm doing is any week where I have time to watch a movie before recording, like with days or however long before recording. If I can fit it into my schedule, I would just go on the Letterboxd, do like a random shuffle of the playlist or of the list, and pick a movie that pops up. And what the Letterboxd gods decided was that I would watch the Infernal Affairs trilogy. So I had Infernal Affairs pop up, and so I was like, well, I got to watch the other 2 as well. So I'm going to briefly talk about each one of these movies in non-spoiler reviews to wind down or to cap off this episode of The Obsessive Viewer. So the Infernal Affairs trilogy, it recently, within the last couple of years, came out on Criterion, on physical Criterion disc, the entire trilogy. I was very interested in it because The Departed is one of my favorite movies of all time. And of course, Infernal Affairs is was the inspiration for The Departed. And I was always curious to see Infernal Affairs and see the entire trilogy. I had heard that The Departed follows the first movie very, very closely, and that's absolutely right. This first movie is really pretty fantastic. It is kind of hilarious to me that I'd seen trivia that, I think that Scorsese had said at some point that he wasn't aware that he was making a remake of a movie when he was making The Departed, which there are so many things about The Departed that are drawn specifically from Infernal Affairs that I kind of have a hard time believing that, but that's neither here nor there. But basically, all that's to say is that the first Infernal Affairs movie is basically the entirety of the Departed storyline. So what I found interesting was that I didn't know what to expect from Infernal Affairs 2 or Infernal Affairs 3. So I'm going to go each movie and to kind of talk about them. The first one came out in 2002, Infernal Affairs. The premise is a story between a mole in the police department and an undercover cop. Their objectives are the same: to find out who is the mole and who is the cop. So like I said, this follows the plot, the plot is followed closely in The Departed, so there wasn't a lot of surprise or anything, but I really, really was I found it to be incredibly magnetic and energetic, and as a crime thriller, it's pretty phenomenal. Like, I was very impressed by it. Let me see what I rated it. I think I rated it something like, I rated it 4 stars on Letterboxd. I really liked it. It didn't go quite as deep into the kind of double lives of the 2 characters as much as like Scorsese's movie did. But the thing that I found really, really kind of something that I found very interesting about it is that it kind of focuses on this broader question of what makes someone specifically a good or bad guy. And I really found that to be a pretty compelling part of these two characters' stories, and their kind of crisis of conscience that they both experience in it. I do still, I prefer The Departed over it because, like I said, it's one of my favorite movies. And yeah, but I can see myself revisiting the Infernal Affairs trilogy as a whole in the future, because I found this first movie very, very compelling. Now, the sequels, Infernal Affairs 2 came out in 2003. They both came out in 2003, in fact. But the premise for Infernal Affairs 2 is, in this prequel, Chen Wing Yan has just become an undercover cop in the Triads, while Liu Qin Ming joins the police force. Both the Triads and the police find an enemy in a rival crime boss. So this movie was interesting because I was not expecting a prequel, and I wasn't, like, when it when I became aware that it was a prequel, so like the beginning of the movie, I kind of expected it to be I didn't expect it to have anything to do with the two moles. Like, I didn't think Liu or Yan would be involved in it, or Lao and Yan would be involved in it. But they're worked in very well, very organically. And what I found really compelling and interesting about Infernal Affairs 2 is that it's kind of similar to Infernal Affairs in that it has these two opposing figures, these two opposing characters. But in this movie, it's, instead of it being Yan and Lao, the two moles, it's Wong and Sam. Sam being the kind of head, like, gangster from the first movie, and Wong being the kind of police captain guy. So, like, it kind of explores their history and their connection in such an interesting way, through backstory and through like the history of it, basically. And there's such a pointed reference, like the movie is clearly clearly draws a ton of influence from The Godfather, and it's really. It would be almost distractingly so, but it's connected. Like, the movie itself is connected to the impending handover of Hong Kong from the United Kingdom. Now, I had to do research on this because I don't understand. I wasn't aware of this, but. From what I understand, for decades, the UK was kind of in control of Hong Kong, and then they handed it over so that Hong Kong can be their own, sovereign government themselves. And this movie is set like in the lead up to that, and I'm not smart enough to detect what the subtext of the movie is or what commentary they're doing, but I know that it is very much there is a commentary done. Like, I'm ignorant of it, of the finer details of it, but there is clearly like commentary being fed in this movie about Hong Kong and the handover of Hong Kong. And in doing that, it makes, like, even though I'm not sure exactly what the movie's saying with regards to that social commentary, it makes all of the allusions and influence from The Godfather, makes it feel more important because it is serving a greater commentary. It's not like they're making this movie to be like The Godfather. It's that they are using The Godfather as a backdrop as a backdrop to explore this power struggle between these warring, like, gangsters as a bigger reflection of, like, the state of Hong Kong and it being handed over from the UK. So there's some really interesting stuff that much smarter people than I probably gained a lot more out of it than I did. But I thought that it was a really interesting entry in the trilogy. And then finally, Infernal Affairs 3, which also came out in 2003. It is a direct sequel to the first Infernal Affairs, and the plot summary is it's kind of a dual narrative. But months after the events of the original film, Ming suspects a police superintendent as being a new mole for the Triads, while years earlier, Jan embarks on his first mission. And this movie, it was really pretty impressive to me, because throughout the entire trilogy, there is that sense, like I mentioned when I talked about the first Infernal Affairs, there is this tension of like crisis of conscience and this sense of identity that the two moles have, and who they are, what they're capable of, who they're aligning with, and that comes to a head in Infernal Affairs 3 in a very interesting way, because it explores the character of Lau, like this crumbling mental state that he has because of the events of the first movie. And in relation to this pseudo cat and mouse game between him and this shady guy who may be another mole, the way that reaches a conclusion, it caps off the entire trilogy in a very memorable way and very satisfactory way for me, because something else that permeates throughout the rest of the other two movies, the first one and the second one, is that it has like these I guess like Chinese proverbs or some kind of proverbs that not even proverbs, that's probably wrong, but like these philosophical like things where it talks about this continuing experience of hell, like these like the constant circle of hell that people find themselves in, and there's no coming back from it. And that is paid off very well in Infernal Affairs 3, because it goes into Lau as a character and how he reckons with what he's done and what has happened, and who he is as a person and who he defines himself as, whether it be good guy or bad guy. So I found that to be really engaging and really, really well done in terms of a conclusive conclusion of the trilogy as a whole. So all told, those are my thoughts on the Infernal Affairs trilogy. All three are streaming on Criterion channel. There's a bunch of extra features on there as well, and it's also out on Criterion disc as well. Really, really liked these three movies. This just like criminal underworld thriller story is just fantastic. I really liked it. So those are my thoughts on the Infernal Affairs trilogy, and that will do it for episode 410 of the Obsessive Viewer podcast. Once again, thank you to Mike for joining me for my Good Grief review, and you can follow him on Letterboxd and social media at I am Mike White, and at his band's social media, which I'll have links to all that in the show notes of this episode. Next week on the podcast, Mike is coming back again, and Tiny is coming back as well, because we are going to be doing our 2023 year in review episode. It's the big episode of the year. Very, very excited about it. It's just, it's like the best time of year, the best thing. So, very excited for that. You guys will see that, on January 18th, but, Patreon will have access to that on the 16th, I believe, based on when we're recording it and all of that. So check out Patreon once again. Just a quick plug for Patreon. A lot of fun stuff on there. I'm going to be doing a lot of fun stuff this year as well. And right now you get access to everything. So check out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I'm going to start playing myself out. Yeah. And also, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. You can follow me on Letterboxd at obsessiveviewer, follow Mike at I am Mike White, and follow Tiny at obsessivetiny. And we're also on Threads and Blue Sky and Twitter and Facebook. So find all of that everywhere. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. And now, enjoy this short clip from our Patreon exclusive feed. For this and more exclusive content, join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I kind of just enjoyed it more than Scanners, and mostly because of James Woods, his character's arc with his girlfriend. And it's something that I found kind of interesting, that the two of them, they get into a little bit of experimentation and pushing themselves physically into some kind of kind of tame, really, but still kind of pushing their boundaries of like sadomasochism, and going into some interesting, like they're crossing thresholds in their physical relationship. I'll say that as weirdly as I can. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our reviews, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on all of our shows, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, plus plenty of written reviews, visit obsessiveviewer.com. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and help grow our community. If you want to support the show and help keep us going while getting early access to new episodes as well as a steady stream of exclusive content, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.